Good evening and welcome to the Message of Hope. It's our first show tonight, and we've already got a few people in the comments there writing, which is fantastic. So it's good to see you all. And I would like to introduce my very special guest for this evening's debut. It is Richard Lucas from the Scottish Family Party. Richard, it's great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm great, yeah. I really appreciate the invitation, Hugh. It's good to be here at the beginning of this venture. So, yeah, looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, it's fun. It's really great to have you on the show tonight. I really appreciate you coming on. I realised I was on YouTube on the background there, and it was playing twice. So quickly, I've got rid of that one. But so, Richard, you were the founder of the Scottish National Party.
Of the what?
Oh, sorry, Family Party. I knew that was going to get mispronounced. So the Scottish Family Party.
You get a letter from my lawyers if you go around saying things like that.
It was a genuine mistake. So you founded the Scottish Family Party. It's been growing extremely well over the last few years. You've been in the elections, Scottish elections, and really you've been disrupting a number of people, which is great. You've been causing a stir with the other parties. How do you in terms of how do you rate from starting from scratch to now where you are today? Especially as a Christian in politics, are you quite pleased with the way things have gone?
I'm very pleased. I always want things to go faster. Whatever point you're at in politics, you always want to be further along. But we just have to recognize that we're climbing a mountain, and we are climbing the mountain. We're getting higher and higher up it. It's a very big challenge that we've taken on, but progress is very encouraging. We're just in the process of appointing a new chairman up in the Orkney Isles, as it happened. So this is an example. We're constantly growing, more people getting involved, and always looking forward to the next election as a political party. We're always looking forward to the next way. As you were saying, we can make waves one way or another, get a bit of attention, do something bold and dramatic, just to push our issues up the agenda.
Yeah, because in Scottish politics, it really seems to be very staid, isn't it? It's all the main parties are so similar, you could hardly tell the difference. And it's incredibly woke, and part of the channel's aim here is really to help Christians maybe realise what these other parties stand for, what's going on in the news and in current affairs, and to suddenly realise that maybe who you've been voting for doesn't represent your actual biblical values or have any kind of Christian values at all. And was that one of the motivations for actually starting the party, or what was it that kind of led you to get things moving?
Yeah, I think the start of the Scottish Family Party, our tagline is filling the void in Scottish politics. I increasingly was frustrated that there was no one on the political scene that was putting forward arguments from, you could either say a socially conservative, you could say traditional Christian values perspective. And a lot of the arguments, they're very straightforward, they're very powerful, and they've got a lot of impact in a lot of policy areas, political policy areas. And yet in Scotland, they were just completely absent. So the Scottish Family Party's mission is to bring these viewpoints into the mainstream of political debate. At the moment, we're trying to do that from outside the Parliament, but ultimately, before too long, we want to be doing that within the Parliament as well. So our mission is not so much, get a couple of MSPs and then our 2 votes out of 129 are going to make all the difference. Well, of course they're not. 2 votes out of 129 are not going to make much difference. But 2 people speaking the truth and presenting a completely different perspective, that really will make an impact. That will make a huge impact. Yeah. And then we take it from there.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Actually, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Farage in the European Parliament when he finally was able to be heard, and his videos went viral because he was stirring up the whole EU. I think in the same way they would be shocked in the Scottish Parliament just to hear kind of sense.
Yeah, well, we would liven the show up enormously. That's not the purpose of doing it, obviously, but the fact that what we'd be saying would be seen as so controversial. The other parties would jump up and down and demand we're kicked out and all sorts. So in terms of the media, basically we would very often be the show. That would be the forum through which we can communicate our arguments, pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-life, etc., pro-freedom. That will give us a forum to present those arguments to a wider public, and a wider public who largely have never heard them. They've never heard the case for sort of traditional Christian values, socially conservative values, because they're just totally absent from Scottish politics. And so once people start hearing them, I think a lot of these arguments are just waiting to be won. It's not that people have rejected these values, it's they're totally unfamiliar with them. So that's our mission.
Yeah. Now we're being asked questions here, so I'll come to them in a couple of minutes, because we've got some points that we would like to get through. Of course, with the news as well this week that Sturgeon has resigned, which is really kind of huge news. When I was researching this show and thinking, right, what are the questions I'm going to ask? That hadn't quite happened yet. And I thought, well, I couldn't miss that bombshell as it went off, because to be fair, I thought she might go, but I wasn't really expecting it to be this quick. In terms of the Sturgeon's resignation, is that something that you were expecting? And what do you think will be the near future for Scottish politics now that she's gone?
I would say I wasn't expecting it. I think there is more to it than the gender recognition mayhem. I think there must have been underlying factors as well. But yeah, they were in a real mess with this, and now she's gone. What will happen in the shorter term? Well, I think in terms of their replacement, whoever replaces them, I think the SNP has taken quite a big hit. I think the Scottish independence movement in general has taken quite a big hit. I think in general, they're sort of pushing the wildly extreme progressive direction, led by the Greens, with Nicola Sturgeon happily trotting along behind. I think that will be reined in somewhat. The next leader of the SNP, I think, will think, right, we just need to cool it a little bit. On these issues, you need to be a little bit more careful. So that will result in the Holyrood parties bunching up again on social issues and moral issues, which I think from the family party points of view, that will, in some ways, it will make the contrast sharper between us and the parties in the Scottish Parliament. But in terms of the political scene, are the Conservatives in any state to capitalise on it? No. I mean, UK-wide, the Conservatives are not exactly firing on all cylinders. No. Labour, with the gender recognition nonsense, Labour were right behind it as well. The Lib Dems are right behind it. The Greens, well, they're just off the scale. So every party in the Scottish Parliament has sort of got a death wish at the moment. They're taking it in. Well, they're not taking it in. They're simultaneously shooting themselves in their feet. So for us, that's good news. Hopefully that will open up the opportunity for more people to say, well, let's forget those parties are already there. Let's look for something new. And here we are.
Yeah. I mean, because I always thought, when you could see Scottish politics going in this kind of very woke direction. I mean, even you would find in church, there might be a slightly older generation who would have been traditionally conservative. And I would always get to talk to them and say, well, who do you vote for now? Because they don't represent our values anymore. And they would say, well, we're struggling with it. Who do you vote for? Now, some would continue to vote for Conservatives, but then when they see what goes on, they think, actually, it's not worth it. And I think this is where your party, the Scottish Family Party, really does take a stand, because it's very sensible. I mean, nobody would be thinking, no, these, in terms of us, 20 years ago, you'd have looked at the policies that you have and nobody would have batted an eyelid. They would have thought, that's quite sensible. And, what's the problem? But it seems like there's been an explosion of just, this kind of crazy woke left-wing kind of policy that Holyrood has been able to conjure almost, and nobody's really been able to, that they've just latched onto it. And it's been very difficult, I think, for anybody to even talk against it. I mean, how do you find in terms of like the media as well? The media seems to be very, supportive of these ideas in Scotland. Yeah.
But just going back to what you're saying about Christians, I think if you went back, say, 50 years, maybe longer even, then I think a Christian, with someone with traditional Christian beliefs, they could have picked Labour, Conservative, Liberals, wouldn't really matter. Whichever party they went into, there wouldn't be a huge conflict with their Christian values. You could be a Christian in each of those parties, and that would be fine. But times have changed. I think a lot of Christians, maybe church leaders as well, haven't really adjusted their thinking in the last 50 years, because now the parties have got policies that are diametrically opposed to fundamental aspects of Christian moral teaching. So it's not the case that, you can be a Christian in this party, just depends on what you think the tax rate should be or whatever. That's not the situation anymore at all. I mean, you said about the media. I mean, the media is generally always pushing in the progressive direction. I mean, there might be a bit of controversy about the latest step in the progressive direction, but it passes in any case. Give it a couple of years and everyone's forgotten about that one. And you'll be on to the next one. But then it passes, you go on to the next one. and it just heads off in the progressive direction. I mean, the Daily Mail, one of all the newspapers, you might have thought the Daily Mail might have had a bit of time for the Scottish Family Party.
Yeah.
In the Scottish election, they described us as far right.
Yeah.
I mean, totally bonkers. Totally bonkers. The Scottish Daily Express, again, we've had lots of occasions we've spoken to them. They've said maybe we'll publish this, but they're really not in our favour at all. They just do not want to give us any exposure at all. Yeah. So there are newspapers falling over themselves to present progressive values, but when it comes to the Scottish Family Party, we don't really get any media help from any direction at all. Apart from, I mean, there's some pretty substantial online alternative media sources that certainly give us a good run. But in the mainstream, it's a pretty hostile environment for us.
Yeah. I mean, I always remember once going many years ago to an old Conservative meeting in Scotland, because I knew someone who was a Conservative councillor in Edinburgh, and I thought they invited me along to a meeting. And when I kind of showed my interest in terms of that I was quite a kind of on the right Tory, and one believed in small government, low taxes, and justice and so on, and they were they didn't know where to put me. And they were saying, "I don't think you'd be." The main response was, "You'd be better suited down south, or not up here." And I thought, well, hang on a minute, this is surely right ground, but it's all. It just seems like a kind of they don't really stand out at all. They're not even trying to grasp those people who normally would have associated themselves as Conservatives, which does seem kind of crazy.
Yeah, but with the UK Conservative Party, there's always a small handful of Conservative MSPs who actually say Conservative things, that have Conservative values. Yeah. And what happens, I think, maybe with Christians in particular, they might hear that tiny handful, and they think, oh, yes, you see, the Conservative Party, they're sort of on our side. But they're a tiny minority, and they never get their own way. They lose every battle within the Conservative Party, and they have virtually no influence whatsoever over the Conservative Party's policy. Yeah, but I think the big parties, they know what they're doing. If you have a person or two who can appeal to a section of society who might otherwise be repelled by your policies, then that's great. Yeah. So I think all the big parties, they think, if we've got a couple of Christians to go and talk about their faith and try and keep the Christians on board, even though our parties totally contradict their values, then obviously that's good. That's a good strategy. They're quite happy with that.
Yeah. It is kind of crazy, and I mean it is because what we just want is sensible policies. We don't want this, latching on to the culture of wokeness that seems to have taken over, and hopefully we can start to win some of that back and get our country back into a more reasonable place. But in terms of the Scottish Family Party, I mean, what I like about your policies is that you obviously reward families. You're into the idea of mum and dad bringing up the children, and making it easier for mum to stay at home with the kids to look after them, while dad goes out to work. Which is, I mean, great policies. They have got historical evidence that back them up for centuries, if not, as a very good thing. And one of my friends was recently over in Hungary, and he said this was the most amazing place. He was it was in Budapest. It was Budapest, it was Budapest, and the capital of Hungary. And I'll be testing my geography if I get this completely wrong. But he said how they were very much pro family, and they're very and their president he's very popular, and he's been able to do a great job. Have you found that what has inspired you to take that line of supporting the family? Do you think, in terms of what they've done in Hungary, is kind of maybe an objective that you would like to achieve, or try and see if you could do something like that?
In terms of family party, Hungary is excellent. They've got a whole range of policies that are just completely different than anything you'd find in Britain. In Britain, the tax system and benefit system, they're almost uniquely anti-family in the whole world. Yeah. The way they discriminate particularly against single income families. But I think so many social problems in Britain, in Scotland in particular, the sociologists, the government researchers, what they're always looking at is, what effect does where you live have on your outcomes? What effect does your income have on the outcomes? Etc., etc., etc. What they never look at is what difference does the family structure have on the outcomes? Now, from other countries, basically the data barely exists in Scotland, but around the world, it's a uniform picture. Basically, stable natural family is best for adults, and it's particularly best for children. Not just a little bit, hugely better for them. So a lot of the social problems the Scottish government spends its time trying to solve, it does its best. It throws money at them. Some of them are not particularly easy to solve at all because the damage is done. But actually getting to the heart of the problem and encouraging stable family life, that's a taboo. Yeah. No one will even begin to mention that because that would be judgmental or whatever. So the idea that you would promote marriage is seen as that's it's toxic, that's judgmental, it's an outrageous thing to do. Even though governments, the Scottish government in particular, spends half its time telling people how to live their lives and giving them advice on this, that, and the other. When it comes to encouraging something as important as marriage, stable family life for the good of children, then they will not do it. As a matter of principle, they will not do it. But we will.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing, because I genuinely think that the more people that find out about what you stand for as a party, that you'll see a lot more support. Because it's, I mean, I have many friends who are parents, and when I tell them about what's been happening in the Scottish system and why we moved, because I had children who were in the Scottish education system, and we moved to England primarily because I was terrified of what was happening. And their response, and how do you take your children out of certain educational classes that are just totally not suitable, and how difficult it was, or potentially how difficult it could be. And now that we've come down here to Northumberland, the difference we've seen in a more kind of traditional sense of teaching makes all the difference. And when I spoke to some of the parents, I mean, they were shocked to think of, the fact that in Scotland, if a child if they're over 12 years old and the parents have said that they don't want them to look or to have certain sex education classes, the teacher can ask the child themselves, and if they say yes, they want to see it and they want to have that lesson, then they can ignore the parents' ruling. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I heard an even worse story than that just recently. Someone got in touch with the family party. They said, I think it was a 13-year-old girl, and the mum said to the school, right, we don't want this girl doing sex education at all. She's not to go to the classes. So the teacher said to the girl, right, your mum says you're not to go to the classes. Would you like us to teach you the same things one-to-one instead?
Goodness me.
I mean, how about that? Yeah, absolutely outrageous. But the culture is that the school, as a government agency, has a solemn duty to provide the children with the education that they have a right to. Yeah. And if the parents are trying to interfere with this right, then we need to protect the children from these parents who are trying to deprive them of a full and proper education. But that's the way they see it. Yeah. So the idea of parents having any influence, the idea that parents might have some positive values to share with their own children, that is just completely off the agenda as far as the Scottish government is concerned. That they just cannot conceptualize that at all. There's one true truth. The Scottish government's got it, and it's going to be injected into every child in a school in Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, the damage I've heard that's been done. I mean, now we're seeing a lot of children in almost every year of Scottish schools, certainly in high schools especially, where there's at least one in every class now almost that seems to be wanting to go down a transitioning route. And this would have been, unheard of even just a few years ago. And you have to wonder that, it can't be healthy. They can't be the numbers, the people who are doing this, it can't, as much as they might think it might be for genuine reasons, it can't be, some of it's attention seeking, some of it's because they're being, it's terrible advice and it's being pushed on them.
It's absolutely evil. It's absolutely evil to use an education system to promote an ideology that's going to lead young people down a path of confusion and misery and all sorts of psychological problems that could blight them for the rest of their life. And that's what's been done to them in schools without the parents' knowledge, being kept secret from parents. When I say to teachers, I mean, personally, I think as a teacher, it's not really enough just to say, oh, it's not really my thing, or I'd rather not teach it. In the staff meetings in that school, you should be standing up and saying, this is an outrage. We're supposed to be educating these children in our care, and instead we're corrupting them and harming them. And this has got to stop. That's what teachers need to be saying. But this is a huge generalization. But the generalization is that it seems with teachers in Scotland, when it comes to getting more pay, when it comes to getting a 10% pay rise, they'll hit the streets in the thousands.
Yeah.
When it comes to objecting to the corruption and harming of the children in their care, nothing like the same response. A whimper, really.
Yeah.
And now there are very notable exceptions to that, I have to say. But that's the big picture, sadly. And to be honest, it's a disgrace to the teaching profession in Scotland that this is allowed to go on without mass opposition from teachers.
Yeah, because I would say that, they're worried about their pay, but it's really the moral question of why they go into teaching in the first place. To have a positive impact on children and take care, to be caring and decent and lead them into a decent place, and make them good, strong individuals to be able to lead their own lives independently. These things, and I know I have a few teachers, friends who are teachers in Edinburgh, and they really struggle, and quite often they find themselves very much on their own, trying to say, no, we cannot teach these kind of things to our children. But I think there'll be people who are watching this who potentially are parents in the coming days. What would you say are probably the three worst things that are happening in Scotland today that would affect parents and that they should really be watching out for?
Affecting parents. Well, if we go with the subject of schools in particular, children's rights are a huge emphasis in Scottish schools. And what it basically amounts to is teaching the children that no one's got the right to tell you what to do. You should be seen equally with adults, and that undermines adult authority. So parents in Scotland, I would say, if you find your children seem quite defiant, if you tell them to do something, they look at you as though they're thinking, what do you think gives you the right to tell me what to do? Then part of the reason for that might well be that that's what they're taught at the school, and it undermines parental authority. In terms of confidentiality, the government in general gives confidentiality to children in Scotland from about 12 upwards. There's medical confidentiality, educational issues. And so things might be going on in your child's life that you've got no idea about, but the school knows. I was talking to a deputy head teacher once, and this deputy head teacher had a 13-year-old girl in the school, and she knew this girl had had an abortion. And the parents came to see her, and the parents didn't know. And the parents were saying, we don't know what's the matter with our daughter. She's not herself. She's really upset. She seems really down. We just can't work it out. We don't know what to do. And this teacher was not able to tell them what had actually happened. So the teacher just had to go, oh, well, okay, well, we'll try and help. Let's see how it goes. But it had to be kept secret from them. So that is a huge
That's a horrific
danger.
Horrific.
I mean, in terms of the broader issues in Scottish education, I say children are sexualized, inducted into LGBT ideology, and changing genders presented as normal, natural, and healthy, and beyond that, something to be celebrated. As soon as you declare yourself transgender, you're special. We'll almost have a party for you. You're so brave. You're the center of attention. We think it's amazing what you've done, which is just absolutely hideous. So there are challenges for parents. You might remember the named person scheme a few years ago, where the government was going to appoint a state guardian for every child, whether the parents wanted or not, basically to make sure the parents were doing their job properly. I mean, that law was struck down by the Supreme Court, but the spirit lives on very definitely. And there's this culture that professionals are the ones who really know how to look after children. They're the ones who really care. And parents, well, they're sort of bungling amateurs who need to be kept in line by the state. Was that three things? Maybe there's three or four in that.
A very, very impressive three things.
Okay.
And I also remember the quite shocking video you did when you went to the high school, was it in Dunbar, where they had the drag queen kind of evening, and they even tried to get the police onto you because you were complaining quite rightly about, is this is this what they want kids to be aspiring to? I mean, that must have been quite an experience.
It was bizarre. So we saw the school was advertising Happy Fest for LGBT History Month. I said Happy Fest as their celebration of sexual and gender identities that correlate with high levels of depression and anxiety. So they build a drag artist, using that term in the loosest sense. And so I did a bit of research on this performer, and their show was absolutely perverted filth of the worst variety. So I wrote to the school and said, right, here are some video links of this performer. You need to cancel them. They're entirely inappropriate. I said, tell me they're cancelled, and I will then report to the media that you did arrange it, but you've seen sense and you've cancelled it. And I gave them a deadline, and they did cancel it. The school cancelled it on that threat. So that, okay, right, fair enough. But I thought I'll go along to this event. It was open to the public. I thought I'll go along and see what does happen, see the rest of it. So as I went along, we arrived a bit late, actually. So I went and sat down, watched the first off, got to the interval. The head teacher came over to me and said, "Could I have a word with you?" I said, "Yeah, sure, fire away." She said, "No, can you come in the corridor?" And I made the mistake of saying yes. So I went out to the corridor, and there were 2 police officers.
Goodness.
So the police car was there before. I think if we'd arrived on time, I don't think they'd have let me in.
Yeah.
That's why the police were there. But the police were obviously just ready to escort me off the premises. She said, my presence made the pupils feel uncomfortable. I mean, that head teacher should have been saying to me, "Thank you so much for alerting me that I'd made a colossal mistake by inviting a filthy, perverted performer into our school to do a show for our kids. So thanks very much for warning me. Really appreciate that. Would you like an extra cake?" That's what the head teacher should have been saying. But instead, she'd got the police there ready to have me escorted from the premises. So that's Scotland. That's Scotland.
I mean, it's quite shocking. I mean, for me, I kind of look at it and think, when we were at school, I was at school in the 80s, in the high school, kind of late 80s, and we were never worried about what you might learn at school. Our parents would drop us off and would say, "Right, go and work hard and try and be sensible. Don't do anything silly." And you think you'd come back with some hires or some qualifications at the end of it, and nobody really worried about it. But now you think, and the teachers also, they were pretty decent. They were quite honest, pretty trustworthy. You got the odd few that were a bit strange or were a bit dodgy, but you got that everywhere. But it seems like now, especially in the heads of schools, there is this almost because they've been drawn towards all of this gender identity and the sexualization of children in the education program. It's almost like it's quite a deviant kind of thing. It's not. These are people who are obviously they're so into what they're doing, and they just can't see what's wrong with it. And I think it's quite, for Christians, you think, well, it's quite obvious it's completely wrong. You wouldn't want your kids anywhere near it. But there's a fierce, kind of, they will come at you with everything, isn't it? If you disagree with them.
If you're a teacher in Scotland and you're ambitious, you'll realise pretty early on that to get anywhere, you've got to toe the line. You've got to go along with all the latest things, and that's the way to get to the top. Now, what tends to happen, if you've got a head teacher who's maybe a bit older, more traditional values, I think sometimes they can sort of get away with it. They might be under pressure, but they can protect their school a bit from the worst of it. Yeah. But I think the attitude of the education authorities is sometimes, okay, let them finish their last 5 years off, then we'll get someone new in, and we'll get the school in line. Yeah. That's the way it tends to go. So they don't necessarily go out of the way to pick every fight with every head teacher. Yeah. But they know ultimately that they're getting things in line with what they want. Yeah. I mean, viewers might not know, and I was a teacher in Scotland. The General Teaching Council of Scotland, the professional body, took action against me, launched a case against me because I said the children need a mum and a dad, ideally. And the case ran for almost 3 years before basically they decided that it wasn't proved, and they didn't do anything at the end. But I was sort of under investigation for 3 years for saying the children need a mum and a dad, ideally. Yeah.
It's ridiculous because it's so petty to say something as really as no issue with what you have said, but there are obviously people who take such offence to these things, isn't it? That it does kind of make you wonder of the caliber of who they're getting, and that's what again we got in Scotland when we have a daughter who had development issues, so they needed a lot more support. And what we were finding is that when you had a meeting, if you could get a meeting with them all, what they would say is that, they've grown in confidence. That was the only thing they could say. But all the rest of the issues regarding the real problems that needed to be fixed, they couldn't do. And I remember, saying, I asked a question of, because there was a gap and a gap was getting bigger, and we were concerned about that. And so we were saying that in the last 6 months or the last, 6 or 9 months, has that gap either stayed the same, or do you think it's gotten worse? And the teacher involved simply wouldn't say. She says, I'm not able to answer that question. And then after that, pretty much refused to speak to us. So it was, it just kind of shows you that I think they're not prepared to deal with the real issues. And also we were finding that in Scotland, to our amazement, if a child doesn't do the work, that they were asked to do in class. And rather than kind of tell them, right, they need to do it and have a bit of discipline to make them do it, to sort them out, they let them go and play. And I was finding that my daughter was being told they can go to an area in the class and they can just play with the toys there until everyone else is finished. And we wondered why all the booklets were half done. And that was the response. So they go and they play. And I think, how are you going to, have an education system with any kind of standards if that's how they deal with people who need a bit of extra help?
Yeah. The attitude in Scotland is that children are so delicate and vulnerable that if you put any pressure on them or you actually force them to do something, they're going to be scarred for life by that. So the most important thing is to keep them happy. They've got to be happy at that instant in time. If you do anything that makes them unhappy, that's really, really bad. And in terms of academic standards, they're absolutely anti-meritocratic. They can't stand the idea that some pupils do better than others. They've always got to pretend it's just a mush in the middle. As long as everyone's having a nice time, then that's fine. We're ticking all the boxes, and that will do. I mean, Scotland's heading towards abolishing exams completely.
It's crazy.
There's a growing head of steam towards that, and that's where we're heading.
I've had some interesting kind of discussions about that, because you kind of think if they don't have exams, how are the pupils going to actually qualify to get into any of the universities out with Scotland?
Well, they'll still be given grades, but the grades will just be made up by the teachers. And the popular scheme, this is really, gathering momentum, is it shouldn't be like the exam board gives you the criteria, then you set the pupils to do their projects and you mark it according to the exam board's criteria, and that gets moderated. They don't even want that. They just want the teachers to make up the grades, because they say only the teacher really understands that class. And then if you do that, the pupils in the least well-off schools can get the same grades as the pupils in the most well-off schools, and they'll have closed the so-called attainment gap. So that's the way they go. So what will happen once they've done that? The qualifications won't be worth the paper they're written on. Then universities will start setting their own entrance exams. Then the Scottish government will get onto the universities and say your entrance exams are not fair. So you need to change the way you do them. Then they'll stop them doing it. It's just.
You kind of think, though, if they're going to ask, say, Oxford or Cambridge or one of the ones in England, which maybe the kids the top children would probably want to aim for, and if they've got exams, and they've not been trained for them, they're going to be in real trouble. They're not going to be able to pass these exams, and therefore they won't get in. And it's you kind of wonder. And also, if they wanted to go abroad internationally, they're going to be slaughtered with that kind of attitude and not be able to cope at all with it. You kind of think, how are they going to? This is a terror, almost like an internal explosion. It's going to destroy everything. It's such a bad idea.
And it's a sort of issue where the job of the Conservative Party should be to really be strongly standing against this and laying out the reasons why this is a bad idea. But instead, they just sort of nibble around the edge of it. They're sort of a bit meek and mild. Maybe they're not sure that it's just all weak. Because basically, they don't stand up to the teaching profession. They think the teaching profession's too many people. That's too many people to upset. So if the teaching profession has been inducted into a certain educational philosophy, then it's too politically risky to challenge that. And so in Scotland, it generally doesn't get challenged. And just things continue to go downhill.
I think what's interesting is when you look at American politics in terms of in the schools, they've been recently, a lot of the school boards have been getting fired because the parents are finally able to get a voice and, have said, right, we're not having this and we're not having that. When you find out the kind of, the teachers are going on TikTok, telling everybody about their true beliefs. And then, of course, the parents eventually find out that these are the people that are teaching their children, and quite rightly come up in uproar. Is there any way, do you think, in Scotland, obviously I know in England, some of the schools have governors and things like that, but in Scotland, is there anything that could be done, perhaps, do you think, that could maybe help that kind of process to happen?
The way I always describe this is a bit like going into your local McDonald's and saying to them, you think McDonald's should become a vegetarian restaurant. But if you say that to the person on the counter at McDonald's, well, there's no point, because they don't make the decision. If you get the manager of your local McDonald's, there's no point talking to them either, because they don't make the decision. The decision's made at a far higher level. So schools in Scotland, what they're doing is implementing government policy. And so it doesn't matter how many people go and see a head teacher. The head teacher is not going to say to their boss, basically, They're not going to say we are defying government policy, we are defying the education authority because a handful of parents have come to see me. That's not going to happen. It's a political problem, and it comes from the top. So it will only be cured by political change. Ultimately, I mean, sometimes engaging with the school can make a bit of a difference. Short term, it might rein things in here and there. So councils have got a bit of power in this area. Western Isles Council rejected the Scottish Government's sex education resources, which is brilliant. But generally, an individual school, it's not really going to make much difference, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if there's another general election and Labour win, any kind of protections we thought we had in England will maybe soon go, because I think the way Labour is, they're probably wanting to copy the Scottish model, thinking that that's a great one to follow. Do you think that will happen if there's a change of government in Britain? Do you think it will go the way that Scotland has gone?
That's part of the reason why things generally, in terms of moral and social issues, things are worse in Scotland. Generally, because in England, you'd have Labour, which would generally pull things in totally the wrong direction. Then you have the Conservatives, who don't particularly pull them back again, but they'll slow it down. They'll put the brakes on for a few years. But then you get Labour again, and it goes for. So basically, in England, it still goes in the same direction, but it goes faster than in Scotland, because in Scotland, the government never changes in that regard. But what the Conservatives never do, or based on a lot of these issues, is they never roll back. They never say, right, this has been going wrong since we made that change, or that change was made 10 years ago. So we need to go back to there and repeal that, and then we'll be back on track. They never do that. They never do that. They just slow things down a little bit.
Yeah. That's been the biggest
disappointment. Labour to take over again.
Yeah, that's been the biggest disappointment, I think, ever since the last election when Boris won. I think all our Brexiteers thought, we'll see with an 80-seat majority, we can really start turning the clocks, or kind of getting rid of all the sorts of dodgy policy that we didn't like. But they've done virtually nothing, and it's been such a disappointment. Well, it's been fascinating, Richard, being able to speak to you, and I really do appreciate your time. How can people find you? I have listed your YouTube channel in the comments, so obviously they can sign up and subscribe there. But how else can they support you?
That's a great place to start. YouTube, just Scottish Family Party. And our website is scottishfamilyparty.org. If you want to become a member or a donor, whether you're in Scotland or not, you'd be very welcome to do that. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well, but probably YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, find our YouTube channel as well. You find lots of interesting content there. Have a browse.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I mean, I don't know if you follow the channel called the Lotus Eaters, with because I think you would do a fantastic job on there, Richard, because they're always looking for the Scottish side, and they take on a lot of guests. I think you'd be an amazing guest if you could get onto their show.
One of our members has been on there. We've got a chap up in Durness, the far north of Scotland. He's now married. His wife had a baby recently, but in his previous decades, he was a gay porn star. So pretty dramatic story now. He's been on podcast, The Lotus Eaters. And I think he's recommended that they should get other people from the family party on, but they haven't bitten yet. But we'll see. But it would be nice to go on from time to time. That's one of the many things where you really think they should have a place for the Scottish Family Party. You'd think they would want to hear from us. Similarly with GB News, similarly with other YouTube channels, but often they don't seem too keen.
Yes, it's a tough bit, isn't it, to try to find a thing. But certainly, I'm looking forward to seeing the progress of the Scottish Family Party as you take on the woke mob and put some sense into them, and hopefully get some real progress. I mean, you've come a long way, and the fact that you're getting representation, you're getting out there, and I love what you do outside the Scottish Parliament with the banners, and outside, especially when you were outside. The prayer thing for the abortion clinics that they were, now that they've tried to bring in this policy of not allowing people to even pray silently outside an abortion clinic. I mean, for goodness sake, you think, what else could they do? But I really hope and pray that you can have a really good impact and a continued impact into Scottish politics, because we really need people like yourself and the Scottish Family Party to make that kind of progress in what is a very, very tough time. I always think of, if you get that, there needs to be almost like a tagline that would get you there. And recently there was a great tagline from Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. And he says, "Florida is where woke comes to die." And we need to get you something like that. We need to get you some kind of tagline. What would be, if you could have somebody endorse you that you think would be fantastic for the party? Who would it be? Who would be your kind of
someone
dream
to endorse us? That's a good question. I need to think about that one. No one is springing to mind. The Pope would be a decent start. How about that?
That's the thing. Well, if you get the right kind of people on board, it's you never know what can happen, and it gets a lot more people kind of driving to see what happens.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Scotland is being mentioned now. It was on the Rubin report. There was when Sturgeon got caught out with the gender issue, they actually showed that, which I thought, well, that is something. But you need to get people like, I suppose, like Candace Owens and a few others mentioning you and how you're battling the kind of crazy Scottish Parliament and things like that to see how it all goes. But you'll have to keep us notified as to how you.
Yes, best of luck with the podcast, with the live stream. What do you call it?
Just the message of hope. That's been an amazing debut. But stay on the line as I close the show. But thank you to everyone who's been watching tonight for your comments and questions. I hope you've enjoyed the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to have Richard Lucas from the Scottish Family Party. I got that right for once. I got it right. I was worried this is always going to go wrong. But no, it's fantastic to have you on the show, Richard. And we really hope and pray that things will continue to go really well for you and the party, and we'll make real strides forward in Scotland. But thanks very much, everyone. God bless, and we'll be back very soon. Bye just now.